In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Most loving and holy God, we come before you this day, grateful for the life of St Thérèse. We pray that we may, like her, be attentive to your gaze upon us and recognize with her that everything is grace. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Just before we begin with the introduction, I'd like you just to mute your computers. We can hear different sounds coming through on the recording. So if you would just, wouldn't mind muting your computers now for us. Thank you so much.
Greetings, everyone. That was Brother Daryl Moresco, who's the director of the Center for Carmelite Studies, and I'm the chair of that center. And as you may have heard, 2023 is a special anniversary year for St Thérèse of Lisieux. It marks the 100th anniversary of her beatification, the 150th anniversary of her birth, the 200th anniversary of the birth of her father, St. Louis Martin. And even UNESCO has gotten into the act by this year officially recognizing, quote, the spiritual, cultural, and educational contribution to humanity of Thérèse Martin, end quote. So accordingly, the Center for Carmelite Studies is organizing various special St. Thérèse events during these months and in the fall semester, including the one that we're having today. Father Lucasz Strzyz-Steinert is a priest of the German province of the Discalced Carmelite Friars, and he's currently a member of the Pontifical Faculty of the Teresianum in Rome, where he teaches courses in foundational theology and spirituality. He's the editor of the academic journal there, also called Teresianum. His research interests include Eric Priswara, Romano Guardini, and modern spirituality. He's given numerous talks and conferences on the Carmelite saints, and today we're very happy to have him with us to speak on Thérèse, the creative power of God's gaze upon us. So welcome, Father Lucasz.
So thank you very much for this friendly welcome and your introduction. And let me now start my talk. Thérèse of Lisieux, the creative power of God's gaze upon us. At the very beginning of her manuscript A, Thérèse of Lisieux calls the story she's about to tell a springtime story of a little light flower. Okay. Yeah. Since then, it has become common, especially in English-speaking countries, to speak of St. Thérèse as of the little flower. But what does this symbol actually stand for? What sense could it have had for this young woman, for this young sister, to call herself a little flower? All sentimentality or cloying interpretations aside, I would like to talk about the deep symbolic meaning of this comparison. Actually, by comparing herself to a little flower, Thérèse speaks about her experience of the creative power of God's gaze upon herself. Indeed, the springtime story of a little white flower, that is the story of her growing, of her becoming the person she actually is, it is a story under the eyes of Jesus. And let me now explain what I mean by that. So, Thérèse and flowers. I don't know if you like getting flowers or if you often give flowers to other people. I don't know, maybe, yeah, sometimes you're priests, so you're the majority, so it wouldn't be so common, but yeah. However, I suppose we all agree that flowers wouldn't be regarded as being practical or useful. They aren't really necessary in terms of biological survival or maintenance of vital functions. Flowers are rather a kind of surplus of life. They stand for joy, for beauty, for pleasure, and for love in this world. And Thérèse was really keen on flowers. In one of her poems, she says, "A flower is a smile of God." As a child in Alençon, she would love to run through the fields of many different flowers when they bloom in the springtime. Later, when she decided on the cloistered Carmelite life, she had to renounce it. But then she discovered that the garden of her Carmelite monastery was really full of flowers, of different flowers. And it was for her a special sign of God's love, of God's joy, of God's friendliness, a smile of God. So she writes, "You know, dear mother, how much I love flowers. When making myself a prisoner at the age of 15, so it's joining the Carmel, I gave up forever the pleasure of running through fields decked out in the springtime treasures. Well, never in my life did I possess so many flowers as after my entrance into Carmel. He sent me in great abundance sheaves of cornflowers, huge daisies, poppies, etc. All the flowers that delighted me most. However, among all these different, beautiful, gorgeous flowers, he would have a special predilection for a sort of small, humble, white flowers called corn cockles. And I find it very enlightening for our topic to observe her joy caused by these little white flowers. She writes, "There was even in the garden of Carmel, there was even a little flower called corn cockle that I have never found since our stay at Lisieux. I wanted very much to see it again, that flower of my childhood, which I had picked in the fields of Alençon. And at the Carmel, it came to smile at me again." So you can see that's a corn cockle, very small, very humble. So, and for her, this flower is so special, and there's so great joy for Thérèse because of her particular happy memories of how she was a child, how she used to run through the flowered fields of Alençon. This white flower wouldn't normally be noticed at all. It is more of a background for others, for huge lilies, roses, or whatever. But for her, for Thérèse, this is a special flower because it is somehow her flower, the flower of her life. It gives her a special pleasure. And so let us notice here, it is Thérèse's joyful, pleased gaze to give a very special meaning to this so humble and small flower. And there is another very important memory linked to this little white flower. Once, after telling her father of her desire to join the Carmelites, Louis Martin, her father, in response, plucked such a small white flower that was growing on the low garden wall in Lisieux, and showing it to Thérèse, he explained to her the providential love with which God had brought the little flower, a symbol of herself, into being, and had preserved it to that day. See, a wall, this is such an unfavorable place on the wall, like where there's a little soil, and it was so completely exposed to the wind, to rain, to sun. But it was precisely because of these circumstances that it became this very particular flower. I don't know if you're familiar, if you know, there's a poem by Elizabeth Bishop, Filling Station. Never heard about it. Okay. And in this poem, the observer, observes a dirty, ugly filling station. But then she discovers then there are plants. There are plants in the filling station. So it means someone cares for them. And the end of this poem is somebody loves us all. There's such like a strange place for flowers, but they are flowers. There are people, there are like forces that take care of them. And this is a very special sign of love. And so in this very, secular poem by Elizabeth Bishop, it is so beautiful because it begins with it describes how ugly, how dirty the filling station is, but it ends with this beautiful phrase, somebody loves us all, because they are flowers. There's beauty, even in such a place. So, but let us now think about the spontaneous happiness and pleasure that Thérèse must have felt when she saw the little white flower in her garden, when she discovered it. Just a spontaneous joy. That's all, that's little flower. That's this corn cockle, this white little flower for Thérèse. And it is her gaze that makes this little flower so uniquely beautiful. Okay, let us move. The next point, God's mystery of her life. So let us now turn back to the very beginning of her manuscript. When reading this first page, we can observe how Thérèse of Lisieux struggles to find a guiding term for the story she wants to tell. What makes me be? What's the most important reality in my life? What makes me a living and loving person? What gives me strength and courage to look at my life? It was quite a difficult life, a difficult childhood, but what gives me strength to look at my life with gratitude and to follow the path of my vocation? And so Thérèse describes at the very beginning how she's praying, how she's reading the Bible, before starting to write. And then, if we look closely at the first page of her manuscript, we discover that she underlines two expressions in it. It's Louis pleut et plaît. It implies the same French verb plaire, to please. In the first case, Thérèse quotes the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3, and going up the mountain, Jesus called to him men of his own choosing, and they came to him.
I don't have a picture.
So we can read in the English translation of her story of herself. But let me call your attention to a linguistic finesse that often goes lost in different translations. Actually, Thérèse quotes this phrase from the Gospel in an old-fashioned French translation. And there she underlines this expression, que lui pleut, that we should translate literally as those whom he pleased.
I'll leave it this way.
Jesus called to him those whom he pleased. They come to him, and they came to him. So in different English translations of the Gospel, we would read men of his own choosing, or whom he wanted, or whom he desired. They are all possible translation of the Greek biblical text. They all reflect the idea that Jesus acts and calls in a sovereign and totally free manner. In Jesus, God's inscrutable will is revealed. You know, that's his calling, his acting.
Oh, host disabled.
Therese
Screen
used
share.
quite playfully with the word player in this context of, you know, how she
Yeah.
tells her life, and she continues ecstatically. This is the mystery of my vocation, my whole life, and especially the mystery of the privileges Jesus showered on my soul. So what's the mystery of which Teresa speaks? What's the mystery of her life?
What that?
Jesus does not call those who are worthy, but those whom he pleases. So that's the second time where she underlines, you know, the verb plaire, to please. So that's the absolute beginning, the foundation of her life, of everyone's life, of her vocation. It is God's will, his sovereign will. God created and called me at this person. It's a mystery why his will, his choosing. And my response is to be an obedient acceptance and doing of his will. But for Therese, this mystery of God's will and the mystery of his call had to do with his pleasing. There is joy. There is something, you know, like joyful at the very beginning. It's not like God's will, or let us fear, let us like be depressed. No, there is joy, you know. God's will and God's choosing is joyful. There is beauty at the very beginning. There is pleasing. And this pleasing is, so to speak, a motivation of God's action, to which I owe my life, my vocation, and so on. And let me call your attention to another like observation or meditating on the beginning of the first psalm, the very first psalm in the Bible, the Psalm 1, where it is said, the law of the Lord is his joy. The Lord of the Lord is the joy of the blessed man. The Catholic philosopher Robert Spemann says, the first thing the Psalter says about the blessed man is what he rejoices in. Everything else depends on that. No, even the Psalter, the first thing that is said about the blessed man is his joy. What's his joy? And everything else depends on his joy. And Therese discovers this, the absolute beginning of God's history with each person is God's rejoicing in that person. Is God's pleasing in that person. And the discovery of God's rejoicing in me, in Therese, makes it possible to love God in joy and gratitude. You know, just for Therese, her joy and her desire to please Jesus is the answer for his pleasing, for his joy. You know, it is joy at God's side, and that enables, you know, Therese to be joyful. And yes, in her manuscript C, she will write that what she esteems and what she desires only is to please Jesus. So we can notice here that, you know, this pleasing is so, it was like a leitmotif, a guiding theme in Therese's story of her soul. But all this become even more clear when we analyze the next step she takes in her story. Yes, Therese asks herself why people are so different. If all that is true, why are we so different? I wondered for a long time why God has preferences, why all souls don't receive an equal amount of graces. Indeed, we are different. We are different, and some may seem to be somehow more privileged than others. Some people seem to have more potential, a better character. They seem to be made, for good Christians, for a saintly life. Or others do not, or not as much. And it can be quite discouraging or provoke envy. And Therese gives some examples of great saints who would have a very innocent and holy life from the very beginning of their lives till end. And then she speaks of great sinners to whom God granted the grace of a spectacular conversion and virtually pushed them, so to speak, into holiness. But she also mentions people who never even heard of the gospel. And that's not their fault. There are the circumstances. There is so much in our own lives that we have little or no influence over. It's not up to us, but that's all part of how we are. And Therese was well aware of her own weaknesses and limitations, especially when trying to live up to the ideal of a Carmelite life. And then she lived in a convent, in a community where some sisters were quite, or rather very difficult. Others were psychologically unstable. Someone called this Carmelite community in Lisieux a laboratory of human frailties. So are we allowed to believe that everyone is called to the fullness of life or to sanctity? Really? Does every single life have the same meaning, the same relevance, the same dignity? If yes, so why all these differences? And Therese cannot understand this complex reality of our human world. She neither tries to explain it logically. Isn't any, logic explained to that. Her answer is her trust in God's loving will, in God's rejoicing, in God's pleasing, she discovered for herself. Therese believes firmly that being created by God means being wanted by God. And being wanted by God means being loved by God. And being loved by God means also being found beautiful, found worthy of love. And here we can discover the deep meaning of her underlying the verb plaire, to please. She believes that every single existence is grounded in God's joy, in his pleasing that person. And to talk about this, Therese uses the image she loves so much, the image of a flowering, blossoming field, in which each individual flower has its own distinctive meaning, its own beauty. The beauty of the field consists in the harmony between the different flowers. Beauty is symphonic. It needs everyone. It's diversity. Yeah, that's the first question. And now she writes, I understood how all the flowers God has created are beautiful. How the splendor of the rose and the whiteness of the lily do not take away the perfume of the little violet or the delightful simplicity of the daisy. I understood that if all flowers wanted to be roses, nature would lose her springtime beauty, and the fields would no longer be decked out with little white flowers. In Therese's symbolic way of expressing her experience of faith, every person is a particular flower in Jesus' garden. Every single flower stands for a particular beauty, and in this way, it is destined to give joy to God's glances when he looks down at his feet. You know, that's the dignity of every single existence. You know, everyone is worthy of being loved because everyone is beautiful. Of course, that's faith, you know. Therese, it is, you know, her experience of God's gaze upon her. And so she says, it's true. It must be true for everyone, for everyone. Everyone is destined to give joy to God's glances. Everyone is destined to, you know, to be found beautiful and to give joy to God, to the absolute love. And even if this, you know, comparison sounds so naive and harmless at first, it is her act of faith, her belief in the creative power of God's gaze, of his will. And she wants no other point of reference in her life than this gaze of God on her and on everyone. It is this gaze in which she discovers joy and a kind of confirmation that it is good and beautiful to be this person you are, and that loving Jesus with all your strength, but in your own way, according to your possibilities, that gives him pleasure, a very special pleasure. You know, you can think
Ja.
of pleasure, have joy about
Curious
life,
kasi unsa ang karton.
and his her inexplicable joy. Yeah, but how can a gaze, God's gaze, be creative? Let me try to explain that on the basis of the phenomenon of love. What does it mean to love? In his enlightening essay on the subject, the German philosopher Joseph Pieper points out that the countless, you know, different forms of love have one thing in common, because you can love a person, you can love food, you can love whatever, flowers, you know, but all that forms have one thing in common. In all possible and imaginable cases, loving someone or something means turning to him, to her, or to this subject and saying, it is good that you exist. It's good that you are in this world. You know, love is this kind of discovery. This is like a statement. I love you. It means it is good. You're good. You're good, you know. And so to love someone means finding this person good, beautiful. But like Joseph Pieper continues, it's not just a statement of fact. It's not just you're good. It's an enthusiastic expression of will. It's a desire. And let us say with St. Augustine, amo, volo ut sis. It means I love you, I want you to be. You know, that's how Augustine defined love. Love is that I love you, I want you to be. So love is not only finding good, but at the same time wanting you to be the person or the you are. And Pieper shows that philosophers, thinkers from different philosophical backgrounds agree on this point. A loving person wants the beloved to exist and to live. A loving person takes part in favor of the existence of the beloved. In some way, a loving person wants to give existence to the beloved. So, for example, Thomas Aquinas says, the I who loves above all wants the existence of the you. You know, that's what love is. You know, love is a desire, an act of will. I want you to be. Why? because you're beautiful, you know. I discover your beauty. At the same time, I want you beauty. I want you to be, because you are beautiful, you are good. And hopefully we have all experienced the miracle of how human love can be truly creative. How people who are loved, like come to life, how they flourish. But of course, in a strict sense, no human being can give life to another human being, can give existence. What we glimpse in human love is a reflection of God's first creative love. It is good who in the act of creation anticipated all possible human love by saying, I want you to be. And at the same time, it is good. It is very good that you exist. We know it from the book of Genesis. God looked at everything he had made and found it very good. God creates us by affirming our goodness, our beauty, by saying yes to us. His I want you to be, I love you, and I find you good and beautiful at like 3 dimensions of one creative act. You know, it's very important, you know, to notice that our human experience is different. You know, first moment is I see another person, and the second is like a judgment. Do I like him or not? Yeah, is she beautiful or not? You know, that's meant to be like being exposed to, you know, to other humans' gaze. But in God, it is one act. And let us see that, you know, with St. John of the Cross. As he says, God looked at all the things he made, and they were very good. To look and behold that they were very good was to make them very good in the word his Son. Not only by looking at them did he communicate natural being and graces, as we said, but also with this image of his son alone, he clothed them with beauty. You know, to look and behold that they were very good was to make them very good. It is the gaze, you know, but this kind of gaze, like I see you, you are beautiful in my eyes, and that's like making them very good. Or another quote from Jane of the Cross, God's gazing is his love, and his contemplation is the esteem of what he contemplates. You know, let us note the difference. There's no ambiguity. A human gaze normally would be very ambiguous, because there's, you know, at the very beginning, can be a fear, you know. Is it a loving gaze, or is it like a disapproving gaze, or what? You know, it's a judgment. So that's you know, there's a strong desire in like being found good, beautiful, you know, in our life, but at the same time there's a kind of fear. But God creates by looking, by gazing, because his looking is esteeming of what he sees, and he wants it to be what he loves. And you know, St. Augustine speaks of this one act on which the existence of each individual and of the whole is based. Therefore, we see these things which you have made because they exist. But of course, they only exist because you see them. You know, that's the source of existence, God's gaze. Like watching, seeing is making. It's not that, you know, I'm here and then, what does he think about me when he sees myself, how I am, you know. God's gazing is his love, is esteeming, finding beautiful, and that makes me be. That makes me be. There's one act, and the experience of God's gaze, you know, in these terms, is like, you know, a very creative experience, an experience of being created now, at this moment, finding beautiful. So when Thérèse speaks of the little flower that is destined to give joy to God's glances, she expresses her experience of being personally approved by the Creator. And this experience of plaire, of, you know, God pleases, there's a pleasing of God's creative gaze. It's like kind of creatio continua, a forthcoming creation. It makes me be. But compared to other saints, Thérèse used to look up to the ideal of holiness, especially, you know, in Carmel, the ideal of a life totally dedicated to God's love. But by doing so, she often would remain convinced that she was too inadequate to live up to it. You know, Mother, I have always wanted to be a saint, but I have always noticed that when I compared myself to the saint, there is between them and me the same difference that exists between a mountain whose summit is lost in the clouds and the obscure grain of sand trampled underfoot by passers-by. You know, that's her character, like this spontaneous feeling of being so small, so inadequate, not good enough. Like, it is her wound, her problem. But then she made this discovery. It is not my looking up to God or to the ideal of God that is decisive, but God's gaze upon myself, God's looking down. That's the most important gaze. And by holding on to God's affirming, loving, and creative gaze, as well as God's pleasure in gazing upon her, she discovers her personal path to holiness. As we know, she wasn't self-indulgent at all. She lived a very heroic life of prayer, of service, and charity. But she did so without acts of violence to her own integrity, without being discouraged. Because she knew perfection consists in doing God's will, in being what he wills us to be. You know, that's the first manifestation of God's will, and she's obedient to this fundamental manifestation of God's will in everyone's life. That is myself. No, the way I am, it's the first manifestation of God's will in my life. It is the first form of everyone's vocation, to embrace the gift of my life and to be that person I am, and to become more and more the person I am. You know, perfection consists in doing God's will, in being what he wills us to be. Because, you know, the first message that God gives us is, I want you to be, not I want you to be another person. I want you to be, that's first. And Thérèse is obedient to that. In her last conversations, you know, shortly before her death, we find this following statement. No, I do not believe I am a great saint. I believe I am a very little saint, but I think God has been pleased to place things in me which will do good to me and to others. You know, she's convinced there is some, beauty in her life, in a very, like concrete way. It's not theory, it's not only an ideal, it's her life. There is beauty, there are good things in her life, and she has to be obedient to that. That's the first form of obedience, the first form of vocation, the first call. And there is joy, there's beauty about that. However, it seems that she kept fighting against her own doubts and lack of confidence, because this anxious question returns in her writings. Is God happy with me? So, for example, in her dream in which she meets Mother Anne of Jesus, and Therese asks, Mother, tell me if God is not asking more of me than my poor little actions and desires. Is he content with me? And she describes the answer had in the dream. He is content, very content. And that fills her with peace and lets her experience heaven. And it is practically a year later that the same concern returns, as we read in her last talks. I was a little sad this morning, wondering whether God was really pleased with me. Oh, what the good God thinks. Who will tell me? That's shortly before her death. It's all the time, the same questioning, like about herself. Is God pleased with me or not? And after hearing from her sister, from Mother Agnes, that yes, God is pleased with her, Therese accepts this response, but not without struggle. I believe that God is very content with me, since you have said so. But why is this desire to please so important to us? And also in our relationship with God, and then with other people. Isn't this desire to please, isn't that, the same like desire to be loved? And Therese sets before us the drama of our lives, a drama from which there is no escape. Like her, we are confronted every day with choices. Whom do I want to please? It's very important, who do I want to please? Because we need this experience. The question is, who do I want to please? The last point, Therese's desire of glory. After reading about the great deeds of the French heroine and Saint Joan of Arc, Therese writes, I considered that I was born for glory. God made me understand my own glory would not be evident to the eyes of mortals, that it would consist in becoming a great saint. That's her story under the gaze of Jesus, her glory under the gaze of Jesus. But what does it mean, glory? St. Augustine defines gloria in Latin, clara cum laude notitia. Glory is fame, is public recognition by God. That's glory, Glory is fame. And I now quote Joseph Pieper, this German philosopher, who, reflecting on the nature of love, described the very essence of the relationship between God and a human being, that I am deeply convinced of that became incarnate by St Thérèse of Lisieux. When we are asked to understand Gloria as the supreme fulfillment of existence, And as the glory of eternal life, we are expected to do two things. The first is to admit to ourselves that in our heart of hearts, there is hardly anything we want so ardently as to be publicly praised and acknowledged. Yeah, that's true about everyone, you know. That's our, you know, very, very deep desire. So, and it was the same about St Thérèse of Lisieux. Like, am I beautiful? Am I good, you know, enough? And the second requirement is that we do not fall prey to the ideal of tight-lipped self-sufficiency, that gloomy resolve to take nothing as a gift, you know, like this ascetic kind of style of holy life. Like, no, I don't need that. So no, I do. I need approving. I need love. And people writes, you know, but the second risk is here, or fall into the infantilism of needing constant affirmation. That's a problem for many, many people in our culture, you know, the need of constant affirmation. In other words, we are asked to adopt an attitude that might best be characterized as childlikeness, being like a child. Therese, the child Jesus, being like a child. A way of leading our life so that we actually achieve gloria, that is, the acknowledgement by the first lover, who now publicly, that is, in the presence of all creation, at once declares and sees to it that it is glorious to be the person we are. Thank you for your attention.
We want to thank Father for his presentation, but there should also be a few minutes for questions or comments if you would like. Is that right, Daryl?
You can.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have a comment or a question for Father Lucasz?
Father Lucasz, in Therese, she oftentimes referred to her as a daisy as well. Is that correct?
Eugene, just repeat that question.
Yes, Father Lucasz, I came upon writings in which Therese referred to herself as a daisy. Is that correct?
The flower.
Daisy. Okay. I mean, is that a question or a statement?
It's a question. Is that a correct understanding?
Not a corncockle. A corncockle. This white little flower, corncockle. You know, let me show you that.
Is that a synonym for daisy?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I'm not. That would be a corncockle. You can, you know, search in Google for daisy. If that's the same. I have no idea, but I would say daisy is like purple color.
They can be purple. They can be yellow. Yes.
Okay.
Various
Yellow.
colors.
So daisy is another type of flower. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Could I comment on the question?
Yes.
In that opening metaphor of flowers, Therese does mention the word daisy, but she does not identify herself as a daisy.
That's good clarification.
She says we should be content to be either violets or daisies, but she doesn't identify herself as a daisy. Just she mentions that word daisy.
The comment that she says in the beginning of the story of the song that we should be content to be violet or a daisy or whatever God's made.
Yeah.
But she doesn't call herself
Yeah,
a daisy.
of course, daisy would be another small flower. So that's it, the idea of being small, like humility, like, yeah, not being like a rose, like a lily, but daisy or corncockle. Yeah, that's, yeah.
That might be a good place for us to leave it today. Just want to remind you that this presentation has been recorded and will go up on our website. If you go to the Catholic University website and then Google Carmelite Studies and then go to our news page, you will find the recording of this talk today there. So it'll take a few days. So just come back to the website in a few days' time. However, on that happy note, we'd just like to say a very deep thank you. How deeply grateful we are, Father Lucasz, that you gave us a very enlightening presentation. The topic itself just inspired me to want to hear what you were going to tell us. And I think you shared something very important about God's gaze on us and how important that is, that when God gazes, or as God gazes on us, he sees us as this wonderful, beautiful piece of creation, the work of his hands. So I think you kind of gave us those insights very clearly and very well today for us. So on behalf of everyone here and our online audience, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.